The pyre stood waiting in the center of Thornwick's village square, its wooden bones gleaming wet in the morning drizzle. Elara could smell the pitch-soaked kindling even from the confines of the stone cell where they'd kept her these past 3 days. 3 days of darkness, of whispered prayers through iron bars, of counting her heartbeats like a death knell. "Bring her out." The voice of Elder Matthias cut through the autumn air like a blade. "The sun grows high, and evil must not be allowed to fester in holy ground." Heavy boots echoed on cobblestones as the guards approached her cell. Elara pressed herself against the furthest wall, her bare feet finding little purchase on the damp stone. The simple white dress they'd given her for her execution was already torn and stained, a mockery of purity before the flames would consume her. "Please," she whispered as iron keys jangled. "I've done nothing wrong." But Thomas the guard wouldn't meet her eyes. None of them would anymore. Not since the children had begun falling ill. Not since old Henrik's sheep had died in the night. Not since the well had run red with what Father Benedict swore was the devil's own blood. All after she had arrived. The door groaned open, and rough hands seized her arms. Elara stumbled forward, wincing as stones bit into her bare soles. The villagers had gathered, men, women, children, all staring at her with the same mixture of fear and righteous hatred she'd grown to know too well. "Cursed one," someone spat from the crowd. "Look how even now the sky weeps for your wickedness." Indeed, the drizzle had grown heavier, turning the packed earth of the square into treacherous mud. But Elara knew better than to point out how convenient their interpretations had become. Everything was evidence of her corruption now. The unusually cold September nights, the ravens that had flocked to the church bell tower, even her own beauty, the pale skin and silver blonde hair that had once made the young men of her birth village compete for her smiles, now marked her as something unnatural. "A month ago, I was simply an orphaned girl seeking shelter," she thought bitterly as they dragged her toward the pyre. "Now I'm a demon in human form." It had begun innocently enough. The harvest in her home village of Millbrook had failed, and with winter approaching, families could barely feed their own blood, let alone take in foundlings. So Elara had packed her few belongings and walked the forest road to Thornwick, hoping their rumored prosperity might mean space for one more soul. She'd found work easily enough. Her nimble fingers were perfect for embroidery, and the merchant's wife, good woman Helena, had praised her stitching of church vestments. For 2 glorious weeks, Elara had thought she'd found her place. A small room above the shop, warm meals, even the tentative friendship of Helena's daughter, young Mira. Then the children began having nightmares. Little Jeremiah, the baker's son, woke 3 nights running, screaming about a beautiful lady with eyes like winter storms who beckoned him toward a dark forest. When his mother described his visions to Father Benedict, the priest had grown pale and demanded to know who had recently arrived in their midst. "But I've never spoken to the child," Elara had protested when they came for her. "I've barely left Helena's shop." It didn't matter. More children began reporting similar dreams. Dreams of the pale lady who sang wordless songs that made them want to abandon their beds and walk barefoot into the woods. Henrik's prized ewes were found dead in perfect circles, their throats unmarked, but their eyes turned solid white. The well water turned crimson for a full day before running clear again, though it tasted of copper and made the youngest babes refuse to nurse. Father Benedict had thundered from his pulpit about demons who took pleasing forms to corrupt the innocent. Elder Matthias spoke of ancient curses that followed bloodlines like shadows. And when they'd searched Elara's meager possessions, they'd found her mother's silver pendant, a delicate thing shaped like a crescent moon embracing a star. "Pagan symbols!" the priest had declared, holding it up for all to see. "The very mark of those who consort with dark spirits." Elara had tried to explain that it was simply her mother's jewelry, the only thing she'd left behind when death claimed her in Elara's 16th year. But fear had already taken root too deep for reason to reach. Now, as they bound her hands behind the wooden stake, Elara wondered if her mother had faced a similar fate. The woman had always been secretive about her past, about why they'd lived so isolated from other settlements. Had she known this would come? Had she seen in her daughter's future the same flames that now awaited? "Any last words, demon?" Elder Matthias stood before the pyre, his weathered face hard as granite. Behind him, Father Benedict clutched his wooden cross so tightly his knuckles showed white. Elara lifted her chin, meeting the eyes of the crowd, despite the fear clawing at her throat. She saw Helena there, tears streaming down her face, but making no move to intercede. Young Mira hid behind her mother's skirts, and Elara's heart broke to see terror where once there had been affection. "I am innocent," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "I have brought no curse to your village. I am nothing more than what you see, a girl seeking only to survive." "Lies!" shouted Willem the blacksmith. "My son Thomas speaks of seeing you at his window in the dead of night, though you were locked away. The dead sheep bore no wounds because you killed them with sorcery," added Goodman Marcus. "The very rain falls wrong since your coming." This from old grandmother Peg, whose word carried weight among the village women. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the rough rope bite into her wrists. There was no point in denying what fear had already accepted as truth. In their minds, she was already condemned, had been from the moment the first child screamed her name in terror. The torch appeared in Elder Matthias's hand, its flame dancing hungrily despite the steady drizzle. The crowd pressed closer, eager for the spectacle, yet afraid to stand too near the pyre. Some clutched religious symbols. Others made the old signs against evil that predated Christianity in these remote lands. "By fire, we cleanse this corruption," the elder declared. "By flame, we protect the innocent." As he lowered the torch toward the kindling, Elara felt something shift in the air around her. The drizzle grew heavier, though not enough to douse the flames that began to catch and spread. But there was something else, a pressure, a weight that seemed to settle over the entire village square like a held breath. "Don't look into my eyes," she whispered suddenly, the words coming from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere she'd never accessed before. She wasn't even sure why she spoke them, only that they felt necessary, inevitable. But Elder Matthias did look. His gaze met hers just as the flames reached her feet, just as the ancient words passed her lips. And in that moment, his torch-bearing hand began to tremble. The mist came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It rolled across the square like a living thing, thick and silver-white, swallowing the gathered crowd until their shouts became muffled and distant. The temperature dropped so suddenly that breath became visible, and the flames of the pyre, which should have been spreading, should have been consuming her dress by now, flickered and dimmed. Through the supernatural fog, shapes began to move, large shapes that padded on silent paws, circling the pyre with predatory grace. The villagers' cries of anger transformed into screams of terror as something massive brushed past them in the concealing mist. And then, through the silver curtain, two lights appeared, eyes, glowing like captured moonlight, approaching with the measured pace of something that had no need to fear mortal men or their flames. As the shape drew closer, Elara saw the truth that sent the crowd fleeing in panic. A lion, massive and magnificent, its coat pure white as fresh snow, its mane flowing like liquid starlight. But this was no earthly beast. Power radiated from it in waves that made the very air shimmer, and those luminous eyes held an intelligence far beyond animal cunning. The great cat approached the pyre without hesitation, seemingly untroubled by the flames that still licked at the wooden base. Up close, Elara could see that its fur actually glowed with its own inner light, and when it opened its mouth, she glimpsed teeth like crystallized moonbeams. "The Mist Guardian," her mind whispered, though she had no idea where the knowledge came from. "He who walks between worlds, protector of the sacred and the innocent." The lion's gaze met hers, and in those ancient luminous depths, Elara saw not judgment, but recognition, as if he knew her, as if he had been waiting for this moment, for her, for longer than human memory could stretch. The flames at her feet guttered and died, extinguished by some power that had nothing to do with the rain. The silence that followed was more profound than any Elara had ever known. Even the constant drizzle seemed to hang suspended in the air, each droplet catching the ethereal light that emanated from the great lion's pristine coat. The villagers had fled so completely that not even their panicked footsteps echoed in the distance. Only the supernatural mist remained, swirling around them like a living shroud that separated this moment from the ordinary world. Elara found herself unable to look away from those luminous eyes. They held depths that seemed to stretch beyond time itself, ancient and knowing, yet somehow achingly familiar. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but it wasn't fear that drove its frantic rhythm. It was recognition of something she couldn't name, a pull that reached into the very core of her being. The magnificent beast padded closer, its massive paws making no sound on the wet cobblestones. Up close, she could see that its white fur wasn't merely reflecting light. It was generating it, each strand glowing with soft silver radiance that pulsed in rhythm with some cosmic heartbeat. The creature's mane flowed like captured starlight, and when it breathed, the air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. "What are you?" she whispered, though she wasn't certain the words actually left her lips. The lion's response came not in sound, but in sensation, a warmth that bloomed in her chest despite the supernatural chill that had settled over the square. Images flashed through her mind. Ancient forests, where trees grew tall as cathedral spires. Silver streams that sang with voices of the long departed. And always, always, the presence of something watching over those who walked the boundary between worlds. Keeper of the sacred spaces, the knowledge whispered in her mind. Guardian of those who carry the old blood, the old blood. Something about those words resonated in her bones, awakening memories that felt older than her 18 years. Her mother's midnight songs in a language that had no name. The way animals had always approached her without fear, as if recognizing something kindred. The dreams that came sometimes, dreams of silver paths through moonlit realms where beings of light danced among flowering trees that bloomed with captured starlight. The lion moved closer still, until she could feel the warmth radiating from its luminous form. Those ancient eyes studied her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but instead felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Slowly, deliberately, the creature raised one massive paw and placed it gently against the rope binding her to the stake. The bonds didn't simply break, they dissolved, unraveling as if they had never been real. Elara stumbled forward, her legs weak from 3 days of confinement, and found herself caught against the lion's warm flank. The creature's fur was impossibly soft, like touching crystallized moonlight, and where her skin met its radiance, she felt a tingling that spoke of power older than the stones beneath her feet. "I don't understand," she breathed, her fingers instinctively curling into that celestial mane. "Why did you come for me?" Again, the answer came as pure knowing rather than words. She was not what the villagers believed her to be, not cursed, not corrupt, but something far rarer and more precious. The blood that flowed through her veins carried traces of the first people, those who had walked between the mortal realm and the spaces beyond the veil. It was that heritage, dormant until awakened by extremity, that had called to him across the boundaries of worlds. The mist around them began to shift and swirl, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. Through the silver haze, she caught glimpses of movement, other shapes, other guardians perhaps, watching from the spaces between reality. The air thrummed with power so ancient and profound that her mortal mind could barely comprehend its edges. Then the transformation began. It started as a shimmering in the air around the great lion, like heat waves rising from summer stones. The luminous form began to blur, to shift, and Elara watched in wonder as the magnificent creature's shape flowed like liquid light. The massive frame contracted and reformed, the four-legged stance shifting to two, the bestial features softening into something achingly, impossibly beautiful. When the radiance faded, a young man stood before her. He appeared to be perhaps 25 years old, though his eyes held the same ageless depth she had seen in the lion's gaze. His hair was pale as moonlight, falling in waves to his shoulders, and his skin seemed to hold a subtle luminescence that made him appear carved from pearl and starlight. He was tall and lean, with the kind of otherworldly beauty that belonged in legends rather than the muddy square of a medieval village. But it was his eyes that held her captive, those same luminous orbs that had gazed at her with such ancient recognition, now set in a face that was both utterly alien and heartbreakingly familiar. When he smiled, she felt something fundamental shift in the fabric of her reality. "Hello, Elara," he said, and his voice was like music played on instruments that had no earthly equivalent, deep and resonant, with harmonics that seemed to echo from dimensions beyond mortal perception. "I have been waiting for you to awaken." "Awaken?" She took an unsteady step backward, her bare feet slipping on the wet stones. "I don't understand. Who are you? What are you?" "I am called many names across many realms," he replied, moving toward her with fluid grace that spoke of power barely contained within human form. "But you may call me Kaelin. I am what your people might term a guardian, keeper of the ancient ways, protector of those who carry the sacred bloodlines." He reached out then, his fingers brushing against her cheek with a touch so gentle it might have been imagined. Where his skin met hers, warmth bloomed like flower petals unfurling in spring sunlight, and she felt that same tingling recognition that had stirred when she touched his lion form. "The sacred bloodlines," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You mean my mother's people?" Kaelin's expression grew soft with something that might have been compassion. "Your mother was wise to hide what you are, little star. But hiding can only last so long. Eventually the old blood calls to its own, and those who would destroy what they cannot understand will always find reasons to justify their fear." "What am I?" The question tore from her throat like a physical thing, carrying with it all the loneliness and confusion of her 18 years. "Please, I need to know." Instead of answering immediately, Kaelin extended his hand toward her. "Come. This is not a conversation for a place still reeking of their hatred. Let me show you truths that words alone cannot convey." Elara hesitated, glancing around at the mist-shrouded square that had so recently been the site of her intended execution. The pyre still stood, its wood now wet and cold, but she could smell the lingering scent of pitch and fear. In the distance, she could hear the muffled sounds of the villagers regrouping, their terror gradually giving way to anger and the desperate need to assign blame. "They'll come after us," she said. "Let them try." Kaelin's smile held no warmth now, only the cold promise of winter storms and midnight hunts. "They are mortal, bound by flesh, and limited by their narrow understanding. We are something else entirely. We." That single word carried more weight than all the proclamations of innocence she had made from the stake. For the first time in her life, someone was claiming kinship with her, acknowledging that she belonged to something larger than her own isolated existence. She placed her hand in his. The moment their palms touched, the world exploded into sensation. The mist around them didn't simply thicken, it became a living thing, rushing up and around them like a silver river flowing upstream. The cobblestones beneath their feet dissolved, replaced by something that felt like walking on moonbeams and starlight. Reality twisted, folded, and when it straightened again, they were no longer in Thornwick's village square. They stood in a clearing deep within an ancient forest, surrounded by trees so tall their crowns disappeared into silver mist high above. The trunks were massive beyond earthly comparison, their bark gleaming with the same inner light that had marked Kaelin's lion form. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, silver and gold and deep purple that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, and the air itself hummed with barely contained magic. "Where are we?" Elara breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in wonders that had no names in human language. "The Threshold Grove," Kaelin replied, his voice carrying easily in the enchanted stillness. "A place that exists between your world and mine, where those of mixed blood can walk safely while deciding which realm will claim their loyalty." "Mixed blood?" He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his transformed form. "Your mother was human, yes, but your father was something else. One of the Seelie court, a prince of the realm beyond the veil. Their union was forbidden by the laws of both worlds." The revelation hit her like a physical blow, sending her staggering back against one of the massive trees. The bark felt warm against her spine, almost like a heartbeat, and she found herself sliding down to sit among the luminescent flowers that carpeted the forest floor. "That's impossible," she whispered, though even as she spoke the words, pieces of her life began clicking into place like a puzzle finally finding its solution. Her mother's secretive nature, the way she'd always known things she shouldn't, spoken languages that had no earthly origin, the manner in which wild creatures had flocked to their isolated cottage, bringing gifts of honey and herbs, and sometimes simply sitting in companionable silence. Is it? Kaelin knelt before her, his luminous eyes searching her face. Think, Elara. Remember the dreams that came to you as a child, dreams of silver cities and courts where beings of light held revels that lasted centuries. Remember how your touch could ease pain, how flowers bloomed brighter in your presence, how the very air seemed to sing when you were truly happy. She did remember. All of it. Every strange moment her rational mind had dismissed as imagination or coincidence. The time she'd healed a bird's broken wing simply by holding it. The way candles had danced to the rhythm of her heartbeat. The dreams. Oh, the dreams that had felt more real than waking, where she'd walked through realms of impossible beauty and spoken with beings whose faces she could never quite recall upon waking. But the villagers, the things that happened when I arrived, were not your doing, Kaelin said firmly. Your awakening blood called to the old powers, yes, but it was others who answered that call with malice. There are beings in the spaces between worlds who feed on fear and suffering, who delight in turning mortal terror against the innocent. They sensed what you are becoming and used it to orchestrate your destruction. What I'm becoming? She looked up at him, seeing her own confusion reflected in those ancient eyes. You speak as if I'm changing into something else. You are. His hand found hers again, fingers intertwining with a naturalness that spoke of connections deeper than conscious choice. The blood of two realms runs in your veins, but until now, the human side has been dominant. The trauma of your near death, the extremity of your fear and desperation, these things have awakened the sleeping Fae heritage within you. You are becoming what you were always meant to be. And what is that? Kaelin's smile returned, soft with an emotion she was afraid to name. A bridge between worlds. One who can walk in both realms and belong fully to neither, yet be claimed by both. It is a rare gift, Elara, and a dangerous one. There are those in both the mortal and Fae realms who would see you destroyed rather than allow such power to exist unclaimed. As if summoned by his words, the sound of distant voices began to echo through the enchanted forest. Harsh human voices, raised in anger and determination, growing steadily closer despite the otherworldly nature of their sanctuary. They followed us, Elara breathed, scrambling to her feet. But how? This place. Surely mortals cannot reach it? Kaelin rose as well, his expression darkening like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. They cannot reach it through normal means. But someone has given them aid. Someone who knows the old ways and has power enough to breach the barriers between realms. Who would do such a thing? Someone who wants you dead as much as they do, he replied grimly. Someone who fears what you might become even more than the villagers fear what they believe you already are. The voices were growing louder now, accompanied by the sound of many feet on the luminescent forest floor. Through the silver mist between the trees, Elara caught glimpses of torchlight, harsh orange flame that seemed to burn wrong in this place of gentle radiance. Elder Matthias, she whispered, recognizing the authoritative tones that had condemned her from the pulpit. And Father Benedict. But there are others with them, voices I don't recognize. Kaelin's hand moved to her shoulder, his touch both protective and possessive. Then we cannot linger here. The Threshold Grove was meant to be a place of sanctuary, but if it has been compromised, we must seek safety elsewhere. Where can we go? If they can follow us even here, there are deeper places, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Older sanctuaries where the barriers between worlds are absolute. But to reach them, you must make a choice, Elara. You must decide whether you trust me enough to leave behind everything you have ever known. She looked around the enchanted clearing one last time, taking in the impossible beauty of a place that existed between realities. Then she turned back to Kaelin, this mysterious guardian who had rescued her from flames and revealed truths that rewrote the very foundation of her existence. The approaching voices grew louder, tinged now with the particular fervor that came from righteous certainty. These people had convinced themselves that her destruction was not merely justified, but necessary, and they would not be turned aside by anything as simple as otherworldly barriers. Yes, she said, the word emerging with surprising strength. I trust you. Kaelin's smile blazed like captured sunlight, and he pulled her close against his chest. Then hold tight, my brave little star. We're going somewhere the mortal world can never follow. The mist rose around them again, but this time it was deeper, more complete. Not silver, but pearl white shot through with veins of gold and sapphire. As it enveloped them, Elara felt herself dissolving, becoming part of the light and magic that surrounded them. The last thing she heard before the transformation took her completely was Elder Matthias shouting her name like a curse, his voice already fading into the distance they were leaving behind. When awareness returned, she was still wrapped in Kaelin's arms, but everything else had changed. They stood on a bridge of crystallized starlight that arced across a chasm filled with swirling aurora. Above them, 3 moons hung in a sky the color of deep amethyst, and the air sang with music that had no earthly equivalent. "Welcome," Kaelin murmured against her hair, "to the realm between realms. Here, you can learn what you truly are without fear of those who would destroy you for it." Elara looked up into his luminous eyes and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of herself and the universe. Whatever came next, wherever this path led, she was no longer the frightened girl who had been dragged to the stake in Thornwick's village square. She was becoming something else entirely. The realm between realms defied every conception of reality Elara had ever possessed. As they walked across the bridge of crystallized starlight, she could see other pathways spiraling through the aurora-filled chasm below, bridges of moonbeam and shadow, of crystallized music and woven dreams. Each led to doorways that flickered like mirages, offering glimpses of worlds beyond mortal imagination. "How many realms are there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper in the singing air. "As many as there are dreams," Kaelin replied, his hand warm and steady in hers. "The universe is vast beyond comprehension, little star, and consciousness creates reality wherever it touches. What mortals call the real world is simply the realm where the most minds agree on the same dream." They reached the end of their crystalline bridge, where an archway of living silver awaited. Beyond it lay a garden unlike anything from earthly paradise. Trees with leaves of precious metals that chimed in harmonious melody, flowers that bloomed with captured starlight, and streams that flowed upward in spiraling helixes toward the amethyst sky. "This is where I dwell when not walking the mortal realm," Kaelin explained as they passed through the archway. "A sanctuary older than human memory, where the laws of physics bend to the will of those with sufficient understanding." Elara marveled at the impossible beauty surrounding them, but even in this place of wonder, she could feel something wrong lurking at the edges of perception. The 3 moons overhead seemed to flicker occasionally, as if struggling against some external force, and the harmonious chiming of the metal leaves sometimes struck discordant notes that made her wince. "They're still coming," she said, not needing to specify who she meant. Kaelin's expression darkened, his luminous eyes scanning the garden's perimeter. "Yes, whoever aids them possesses power I had not anticipated. To breach the barriers this far into the between spaces requires knowledge of the oldest magics, or alliance with beings whose very existence threatens the balance of all realms." A chill wind arose from nowhere, carrying with it the scent of burning pitch and human sweat. Through the silver leaves of the nearest tree, Elara caught a glimpse of orange torchlight moving with purposeful determination. "Tell me the truth," she said, turning to face Kaelin directly. "What is my blood really? Why are they so desperate to destroy me that they would follow us even here?" Kaelin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the visible garden. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of ages. "Your father was not merely a prince of the Seelie court," he began. "He was heir to the throne of eternal dawn, ruler of the realm where light itself is born. Your mother was descended from the first human mages, those who learned to channel the raw forces of creation. Their union was forbidden precisely because the child of such a pairing would possess power to reshape reality itself." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. "Reshape reality? You are what the oldest prophecies call a world weaver," Kaelin continued, his hand moving to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "One who can blur the boundaries between realms, who can make the impossible manifest through will alone. In the right hands, such power could heal the wounds between worlds, unite the scattered peoples of a dozen realities. in the wrong hands. It could unmake everything, she finished, understanding flooding through her like ice water. Yes, and there are those who believe that any power so great is too dangerous to exist, regardless of the intentions of its wielder. They would rather see you dead than risk the chance that you might one day choose to use your abilities for purposes they cannot control. The torchlight was growing brighter now, accompanied by voices raised in what sounded like ritualistic chanting. Through the supernatural barriers that protected this realm, Elara could make out individual words in a language that predated human civilization. "Father Benedict," she breathed, recognizing the priest's voice among the chanters. "But those aren't Christian prayers. What is he?" "Old blood recognizes old blood," Kaelin said grimly. "Your village priest carries the heritage of those who served darker powers before the White Christ came to your lands. He knows what you are because he is something similar, a descendant of the shadow courts, those who feed on fear and worship entropy." The garden around them began to shudder, the crystalline streams disrupting their spiral flow as cracks appeared in the very air. Whatever forces were being brought to bear against their sanctuary, they were succeeding in their assault on the barriers between worlds. "What do we do?" Elara asked, though even as the words left her lips, she felt something stirring within her, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with power finally awakening to its full potential. "We stop running," Kaelin said, his own form beginning to shimmer with the same inner light that had marked his lion shape. "The time for hiding is over, beloved. If they want to face a world weaver in her own element, then let them learn what that truly means." Beloved. The word sent warmth cascading through her chest, and with it came a certainty that transcended rational thought. She loved him, this mysterious guardian who had rescued her from flames and revealed truths that rewrote her entire existence. More than that, she belonged with him, belonged to the strange and wonderful realm he represented. The barriers finally shattered like crystalline glass, and through the breach poured the remnants of Thornwick's population. But they were not the simple villagers she remembered from the square. Their eyes burned with eldritch fire, and their movements possessed an inhuman fluidity that spoke of possession by forces beyond mortal comprehension. At their head walked Father Benedict, but the mild-mannered priest had been replaced by something altogether more sinister. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and shadows writhed around him like living things. Elder Matthias flanked him on one side, while on the other moved a figure Elara had never seen before, a woman in flowing black robes whose face was hidden beneath a hood that seemed to devour light. "Abomination," the priest called out, his voice carrying harmonics that made the metal leaves of the garden trees ring with discord. "Child of forbidden union, your very existence is a stain upon the natural order." "Natural order?" Elara stepped forward, and as she did, she felt power flowing through her like liquid starlight. The cracks in the air began to seal themselves at her approach, and the 3 moons overhead shone brighter in response to her presence. "You speak of natural order while consorting with entities of shadow and entropy." The hooded woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass and dying stars. "Clever little mongrel. Yes, we serve the dark between, those spaces where nothing exists, where the absence of light and love and hope holds dominion. Your light burns too bright, child. It must be extinguished before it grows strong enough to challenge our masters." "Never," Kaelin growled, moving to stand beside Elara. His human form was dissolving, revealing the magnificent lion beneath, but this time the transformation continued beyond that shape. He grew larger, more luminous, until he towered above them all. Not merely a lion now, but something that embodied the very concept of guardianship and protection. The battle that followed transcended physical conflict. Elara found herself wielding power she had never known she possessed, weaving light and possibility into shields that turned aside attacks of pure darkness. The possessed villagers fought with inhuman strength and coordination, but they were mortal vessels containing forces they were never meant to hold. One by one, they fell, not destroyed, but freed from the shadow entities that had claimed them. As each villager collapsed, the darkness that had possessed them writhed briefly in the garden's luminous air, before being consumed by Elara's growing radiance. Father Benedict proved more difficult. The shadow that wore his form was ancient and cunning, striking not with brute force, but with whispered suggestions that tried to turn her power against itself. It showed her visions of what she might become, a tyrant ruling over multiple realities, a goddess drunk on her own omnipotence, a destroyer who unmade worlds in fits of pique. "This is your destiny," the thing hissed through the priest's mouth. "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Better to die now, while you still possess a soul worth saving." But Elara had Kaelin beside her, his love and faith burning away the doubt the shadow entity tried to plant. She reached out with abilities she was only beginning to understand and simply severed the connection between the possessing force and its vessel. Father Benedict collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, his human soul restored but unconscious. Only the hooded woman remained, and she had grown larger during the battle, fed by the defeat of her servants. Now she towered above them, a figure of pure negation that hurt to look upon directly. "You cannot destroy me, little light," she said, her voice echoing from dimensions where sound had no meaning. "I am the void between stars, the silence between heartbeats. I am what remains when all else has passed away." "Maybe I can't destroy you," Elara replied, feeling the full weight of her heritage finally settling into place around her like a mantle of starlight. "But I don't need to." Instead of attacking, she opened herself completely to the power flowing through her veins, both the wild, creative force of the Seelie realm and the grounded, nurturing energy of human love. She became a bridge between realities, a living connection that allowed light to flow freely into spaces that had known only darkness. The void entity shrieked as illumination flooded through it, not destroying its essence, but transforming it back into what it had been before corruption claimed it. A guardian of necessary endings, a force that allowed old things to pass away so new ones could be born. When the light faded, the garden was peaceful once more. The unconscious villagers lay scattered among the luminous flowers, their faces peaceful for the first time since Elara's arrival in Thornwick. The being that had been the void entity knelt among them, its form now composed of gentle twilight rather than consuming darkness. "Thank you," it whispered in a voice like wind through autumn leaves. "I had forgotten what I was meant to be." Elara swayed on her feet, exhausted by the effort of channeling so much power. Kaelin caught her before she could fall, his strong arms wrapping around her with protective tenderness. "Is it over?" she asked, leaning into his warmth. "The immediate threat, yes," he replied, his lips brushing against her hair. "But you have revealed yourself now, shown what you truly are. There will be others who seek to either claim or destroy you. Then we'll face them together," she said, without hesitation. "I choose this realm, Kaelin. I choose you. Whatever comes next, I want to meet it at your side." His smile was radiant as one of the moons overhead. "And I choose you, my brave world weaver. Together, we'll protect the spaces between worlds and ensure that love always finds a way to bridge the impossible." As dawn broke over the realm between realms, a dawn that painted the sky in colors that had no earthly names, Elara felt the last of her old life falling away. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been condemned by ignorance and fear. She was something new, something powerful, something that belonged to all realities and none. But most importantly, she was beloved. The unconscious villagers began to stir, their memories of the shadow possession already fading like nightmares at daybreak. They would return to Thornwick with no clear recollection of how they had come to this impossible place, remembering only that the girl they had tried to burn had vanished in supernatural mist. In their absence, new stories would grow, tales of the Mist Guardian and his beloved, protectors of the innocent who walked between worlds and appeared whenever the boundary between light and darkness grew too thin. And in the garden at the heart of all realities, two souls who had found each other across the vast expanse of possibility settled into their eternal watch, guardians of love in all its infinite forms.